The World Health Organization approved the first Chinese-developed COVID vaccine for emergency use on May the 7th. According to the UN agency, the Sinopharm vaccine is easy to store, making it suitable for locations with limited resources, and proved 79% effective in clinical trials. The vaccine can thus be included in a global vaccine solidarity initiative called COVAX, which aims to improve vaccine distribution equity. How does this approval change the picture of vaccine distribution and access? Where does it fit in China's pledge to make vaccines a global public good? Joining me today from Seoul is Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, and Professor Zhiwei from the Center for Public Health Research of the Medical School at Nanjing University. Welcome to The Point. First, let's have a listen to the World Health Organization's approval on Sinopharm's COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use.
WHO gave emergency use listing to Sinopharm Beijing's COVID-19 vaccine, making it the sixth vaccine to receive WHO validation for safety, efficacy, and quality.
The other vaccines include Pfizer, Moderna, two versions of AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. So the Sinopharm vaccine has an overall 78% efficacy according to WHO's evidence assessment report. Dr. Kim, help us understand, where does the EUL, emergency use listing, mean for Sinopharm, and why does WHO's EUL listing matter so much?
That's a great question. You know, the Chinese government has officially approved the Sinopharm vaccine. There are a number of governments around the world that have done that also. But in order to enter the COVAX mechanism, in order to be distributed around the world through this organization that's 189 countries led by Gavi, CEPI, and the World Health Organization, in order to be distributed around the world, it has to be approved by WHO. And that approval was just given. So we hope that some of the 1 billion doses that we think that Sinopharm can manufacture will be devoted for global health, to provide access and equity to safe and effective COVID vaccines around the world.
Professor Wu, what's your understanding of the significance of EUL listing, and how does this listing support Sinopharm's credibility around the world?
If you look at the Sinopharm's vaccine through the early phase of a clinical trial down to its approval by Chinese government and acceptance by a number of countries when putting into the use. Actually, there have been a lot of suspicions and biased reports. I think the WHO's assessment gives the final approval to include the Sinopharm's vaccine into the COVAX program, and that basically means that the expert panel approves its safety and efficacy data, and this is actually, I think, it's quite significant for the Chinese pharmaceutical industry as well. So basically, all the clinical trials and the standard of productions and the quality controls very much actually in line with the international standards. So this is, I think, is a very important step in terms of improving the vaccine supply and overcome the bottlenecks to prevent the spreading of the COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Actually, according to my understanding, Sinopharm's vaccine has already been approved for emergency use in some 80 countries and regions around the world, and yet it is still the first Chinese-made vaccine to receive the WHO emergency use approval. So for all of the country that are still in the process of approving this vaccine or thinking of approving this Chinese vaccine, what would the EUL mean for these processes and eventually for the greater cause of fighting against COVID-19? Dr. Kim.
Yeah, so I mean, we already know that the modeling has suggested that if we don't provide more equity in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, global COVID deaths will double. We also know that the economic impact of not providing some aspect of equity will be substantial, on the order of $4 to $5 trillion to the high-income economies, including China, North America, and Europe. Finally, I think we know that there's a biological consequence of not controlling COVID-19. And that biological consequence is the generation of mutants that will undermine all the vaccines. So there are a lot of reasons for us to proceed, and there are very important reasons for countries to accept COVAX vaccines through the global mechanism. The emergency use listing means that an organization like the World Health Organization is not only certifying safety and efficacy, which they had said several weeks ago was the case, but they also stand by the quality. And I think the one thing to emphasize, though, is that quality is not a static thing. Sinopharm, as with all the companies, are going to have to maintain active programs of quality that will ensure not only the current batches, but the future batches of vaccine meet the same standards of excellence that they've shown so far. So again, this is something that's very important. Yeah. It has dramatic implications because it increases supply and hopefully will allow us to bring COVID-19 under control or better control.
Of course, quality is always important. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the World Health Organization, has called, however, the situation unacceptable that 80% of vaccines are in high-income countries, while the low-income countries only receive 0.3%. Dr. Kim, how come that so far the distribution has been so unequal?
So, unfortunately, this is not an unusual circumstance for vaccines for global health. The rotavirus vaccine, which is used around the world, over 100 countries have rotavirus vaccine in their national programs. Rotavirus vaccine was approved in 2006 in the US. It was approved in 2009 by WHO. In 2021, 60% of the world's children do not receive all 3 doses of rotavirus vaccine. So it's not unusual for vaccines to start out in high-income countries and make their way gradually into low and middle-income countries. For COVID, we are actually in a slightly different situation. The entire world needs to be vaccinated. And so instead of making 100 million doses of rotavirus vaccine a year, we're going to have to make 8 to 12 billion doses of COVID vaccines over the next few years in order to vaccinate enough of the people in this world to achieve some level of herd protection. So it's an enormously enlarged problem, and the usual situation, which is to have delays in access in low and middle income countries, is not going to be acceptable.
Sinovac is another Chinese COVID-19 vaccine that's also seeking WHO's EUL listing. The company has a current capacity of 300 million doses per month. That's about 10 million doses a day, and it's also building joint production with foreign countries. Will the inclusion, Professor Wu, will the inclusion of Chinese vaccines be a potential game changer?
I would think so. Actually, we're still in severe shortage of vaccines. Sinovac's vaccine right now is in the approval process, and also China is ramping up the vaccine production capacity as well. And basically, our aim is to have the production capacity reaching 3 billion doses a year. I think this is a huge challenge. Actually, right now we are producing approximately 1 billion doses per year. So basically, we're trying to triple the production capacity. So this is something actually I think we are trying to push sufficient vaccine supply, and not only for domestic use but also to for international use as well. And we have to realize that China has a commitment to COVAX program. Also, we have so-called bilateral agreement with a number of other countries as well, approximately close to about 50 countries to supply vaccine for their use. So the Sinovac joining the vaccine program would be very significant.
Some media reports, however, raised concerns, for instance, about Sinopharm's phase 3 trial lacking data on the elderly, because WHO's evidence assessment report shows that only 209 people over 60-year-old were enrolled. The WHO in the news release responded that it's not recommending an upper age limit for Sinopharm's vaccine. There is no theoretical reason to believe that the vaccine has a different safety profile in older and younger populations. Professor Wu, what could be the possible reasons behind the lack of data for the elderly people in the report?
Well, actually, all vaccine trials are in kind of a stepped trials. So the Sinopharm's vaccine initially included the population actually between 18 to 59 years old. And the second phase of the trial included elder people. So the data available in the early stage actually basically are including the groups younger than 60 years old. So that's basically, other vaccine producers conducting a clinical trial as well. So the more comprehensive data we have is the younger age group. But for the elder group, actually, we do have a few hundred cases. So far, we don't see any severe adverse effect. So there is no reason that we would suspect the safety of this vaccine in the elder population. The other thing is that if you look at the historical data for inactivated vaccines, usually they don't. They actually behave quite similarly in elder population because this population tend to have a weaker immune response instead of a stronger immune response and causing damage or causing a severe adverse effect too.
Yeah. Another piece of information that drew some people's attention is the reports that Seychelles, the country reportedly with the highest percentage of inoculation in the world, actually has seen a second wave of coronavirus cases. So some people are saying, because this country has received mostly Sinopharm vaccines, and they also have received some AstraZeneca vaccines produced by India. So some people are asking if, this country, if 65% of the population has already been vaccinated, how come there's a second spike in cases? Dr. Kim, is there enough information for us to understand exactly what has happened?
Good point. At this point, we still don't know everything we need to know about the outbreak in the Seychelles. To some extent, there are some gaps in the data, not only in the elderly people with the Sinopharm vaccine, but in use in populations that may have exposure to variants of concern, those mutants of the virus that may be circulating in different parts of the world. So we don't have enough information there, and WHO flagged that as well. I think that it's important to remember that when we look at the population effect of a vaccine, what we're really looking for is to make sure that the vaccinated people have less or no severe disease, no hospitalization, and reduced rates of. And so far, based on the data that we know, that's what the Sinopharm vaccine shows. So a population effect that is very, very important, and that's what countries are looking for. Whether the infections that we're seeing in the Seychelles will progress or what they mean, at this point, we don't have enough information.
Yeah. There have been concerns over in some press in the United States, for instance, about the waiver that U.S. President Joe Biden has supported of IP rights of COVID-19 vaccines. Some people are saying this could possibly allow China or Russia to steal vaccine technology from the United States or from the countries that currently hold these IP rights. Professor Wu, what are your thoughts on such concerns, such worries? And similarly, now China is building, vaccine factories. For instance, Sinopharm partnered with the UAE, Sinovac partners with Egypt to produce vaccines locally. Should China also be concerned about possible, leak of vaccine technology to countries that, it doesn't want to have this kind of technology?
Well, waiving the vaccines patent definitely is a good gesture, but accusing China is going to steal the vaccine technology, that's absolutely ridiculous, because China has its own mRNA vaccines in the clinical trial. It doesn't need to steal any vaccine technology, at all. I think, waiving a vaccine patent, it's a good gesture, but actually could cause a lot of problem as well, because nowadays a vaccine is not only made by Pfizer or Moderna. Basically, you have you have a range of vaccine ingredient supplies. Pfizer's vaccine involved about 280 different ingredients. Basically, they outsourced those ingredients from different countries and supplies. And there was a range of issues here that when you simply wavering the pattern without sit down with different suppliers and manufacturers to build a vaccine development or vaccine production group, basically that could cause chaotic problems.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, and Professor Zhiwei from the Center for Public Health Research of the Medical School at Nanjing University.